What's up? It's Ben from WODprep, and in this video, we are going to talk about 5 things that you should look for in the perfect training shoe for CrossFit. I am here with my good friend Jake from That Fit Friend. He has a YouTube channel that is loaded with great content, especially shoe content. He knows more about shoes than I know about pretty much everything. So I'm really excited to have him here, and we are going to go through 5 really important things to know about your training shoes. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be able to pick out a shoe that's gonna fit perfectly no matter what kind of training that you do. I know personally, I have used a whole wide variety of shoes. I've had some that have given me blisters. Every single pair I've ever had have given me blisters on my heels. We'll get into which company that is in a second. I've had some where they worked great, and then I did my first rope climb and they completely crumbled. And then I've had some that have just like made my feet cramp or they just haven't felt good. What about you? You've tried probably 10 times more shoes than I have.
Yeah, there's such a realm of shoes now in the cross-training shoe world too, because every company has their own model, every company has multiple iterations of every model. And I think like the main takeaways for this video that I would love for the viewers to get away with is knowing what details to look for in regard to the specificity of your training. So like what details actually matter and what details do we really not need to be that concerned about? Because we can look at a shoe's construction until we're blue in the face, but like what details actually matter for performance and what is the...
There's a lot of minutia that doesn't matter, right? Are you running? Are you lifting really, really heavy? Are you predominantly squatting all the time? Like there's a lot of stuff, and in the sport of CrossFit, we do it all, right folks? So let's dig into it. And by the way, if you stick around to the end of the video, we have a really cool thing put together called the Shoe Calculator. This is something that Jake has put together on his website, and he's helping us put one together for WODprep specifically, where you can answer a few questions and actually we're gonna spit out a suggested shoe, whether you have a wide foot or a narrow foot, or you squat a lot or you run a lot. Anyway, we'll get to that at the end of the video, so stick around and we'll give you some free goodies. So thing number 1 that you should care about when picking your perfect training shoe is something called offset. Jake, what the heck is that?
Yeah, so heel to toe drop, also known as offset, is the amount of height where your heel is sitting in regard to your toe. So higher offsets mean you're gonna have a slightly higher heel position than where your toe is sitting, or the base of the forefoot. Now, why would that matter for cross training? Well, when we look at the different types of heel to toe drops, some people will have natural preferences for lower drops versus higher drops. What can drops do for your lifting and your overall biomechanics? So we know with if we look at like a weightlifting shoe, with a higher drop, so a higher heel position, we're gonna be putting that foot into a plantar flex position before we actually start moving. And what can then happen is we put our ankle into an environment that feeds a little bit better into dorsiflexion. It's similar to standing on a hill with your heels like on the back of the hill and you're then squatting down, how easy that feels. Right. Similar here, where it's like a higher drop is gonna put your body into a positioning where the knees can track a little bit easier. You can generally achieve greater depths with a more upright torso position. And now when talking about cross-training shoes specifically, generally we'll have a range of drops, and that usually ranges between like 2 to 8 millimeters. Generally, folks will reach for like a 4 or 6, sometimes a 2 if we're looking at certain models, because it's like a nice lower ground where you can tackle a lot of different tasks in it. For example, like wearing something like a weightlifting shoe that has like, let's say a 0.75 inch heel elevation or a 20 millimeter drop, you're not gonna want that for things like box jumps or anything where you're
running, that would probably feel really awkward. So you're saying a traditional like weightlifting shoe, like I've had the same weightlifting shoes for years. You said that's like 3/4 of an inch or 20 millimeters. But the shoes that generally we're gonna be going over here in a second are in the anywhere from 0, which is probably a little rare for some of us. There's some people who train with 0. And the normal like Metcons, Nanos, Innovates, that's in like the 4 to 6 range?
Yeah, 4, 6, and 8. And it's really interesting because what is commonly known as like the norm heel to toe drop is like 4 millimeters, and people are like, oh, that's the best, but it's like really it's just been adapted by all these different companies, and now we associate that with being what's best. And that's what I think is really interesting about choosing a heel to toe drop that works for you, is because it needs to be individual. And now the big thing here that I want to get across is with drops, it will change your biomechanics a little bit based off of what we talked about when it comes to that environment for dorsiflexion. But when we're looking at like things like 4 to 6 or like 6 to 8, that probably doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
However, like we were talking about, if you look at something like the Innovate FLY G300, which has a 6 millimeter drop, and something like the Zero Shoes 360, which is their brand new cross-training shoe that has a 0 drop, you're gonna notice a pretty big difference.
I literally just put these on. This is the shoe that I'm currently absolutely freaking in love with. And then I put on this shoe right before we shot this video, and it was a very distinct difference. Working out in them, especially for an extended period of time, squatting in them, running in them would feel very different. And again, it is all personal preference. So what did you say, this is 6 millimeters?
That's 6 millimeters, this is 0. And obviously like there's a big difference between a training shoe and a barefoot shoe, but the point stands as to where the heel is gonna be sitting in this shoe versus this shoe. And if you're like squatting, for example, what is going to happen with your overall mechanics wearing this shoe and this shoe. In a zero drop shoe or like a 2 millimeters, you are going to need to be able to achieve a little bit greater degrees of dorsiflexion on your own.
Your ankle needs to be more flexible.
But yeah, so when looking at drops and considering a drop that works for you, what I would suggest is looking anywhere from like 2 to 6 millimeters. Those are usually the sweet spots. If you know that you generally need a little bit more assistance with dorsiflexion, looking for like a 6 to 8 can be a really good call, especially if you are primarily focused on lifting in your cross training shoes. And then if you want more of like a barefoot / natural blend, 0, 2, even the 4 millimeter shoes at times can feel like more flat to the ground.
For sure.
So these are all things to consider. To all my cross training shoe fans out there, you obviously know that the Metcon 5 and 6 comes with this additional insert. So the drop on this shoe to begin with is 4 millimeters. And then when you insert this under the insole, it adds an extra 8 millimeters. So then that'll put this shoe at 12 millimeters. Okay. Now again, speaking to what we just talked about, 12 millimeters to something like a 0,
you're actually gonna feel it.
That's a significant difference.
For sure.
So if you're looking for like a blend of a cross training shoe that can also serve as like a quote unquote like Suedo weightlifting shoe, not give you the same height, but still give you an elevation. Looking into like a Metcon 5 or 6 could be a good call for you, especially if you are primarily worried about lifting in this style of shoe with a higher drop.
And one thing, I actually have some in my workout bag, and of course I'm forgetting the brand, so I'm not even gonna say it, but we will have links below to super cheap inserts and put them underneath the insole of any training shoe pretty much that you're using. And I actually used to do that in the past when I had issues doing things like pistols, and I thought it made a huge difference. But anymore, like I said, I'm training with this one. It happens to be 6 millimeters of offset, and I think it's pretty lit. So we've talked about offset. Basically, the higher the heel or the greater the offset, potentially the easier it is to squat, but it could make running feel a little odd or different or weird. So it's gonna be a personal preference for you. Yeah. There's lots of people who can train really well with 0 offset, basically a barefoot style shoe. And then there's lots of people who do well with the higher offsets. It's gonna be personal preference mostly. Point number 2 is toe box. What's the toe box? I've heard about it, but I'm not exactly clear on what it is.
Yeah, so a toe box is going to be the amount of space up here in the forefoot that you can actually splay and move your toes.
Why does that matter?
Why does this matter for lifting? So when we talk about cross training specifically and like the vast amount of activities that you can do with cross training, generally you're going to want enough room to splay those toes, to grip the floor, to feel the ground below you. And if you're constantly cramped and have like this foot position here, like when we're doing more static strength work, we know that if we're not able to really root those feet, it can actually be a problem up the kinetic chain when it comes to creating stability and creating strength from the ground up in all of our lifts. Your individual foot anatomy is going to vary. So your foot anatomy, viewer who's watching, is very different than mine and Ben's. And that does not mean that we're all gonna fit into the same shoes. I think in the CrossFit world and the cross training shoe world, we at times box ourselves into thinking like, oh, we need to wear the Nike Metcon because that's the big shoe right now. That's what
Matt Frazier wore the Metcon, so that means I should wear the Metcon.
Exactly. And so then we'll hear people like, oh, well, I have heel slip in the Metcon, or I have heel slip in the Nano. Why is that? Well, most likely the last that company used for that shoe doesn't align with your anatomy very well. So now you've had to size up to accommodate for their foot structure that they used for that shoe, and now you're experiencing sizing issues because it's just not made for your shoe.
So let's talk about that really quick because I don't want to skip this. So a last, basically when a company's making a shoe, they pretty much they use a forming, aka the last, basically the shape of the shoe on the inside, how the target audience's foot will most likely be shaped. And then they kind of stick with that. So all of the Metcons in this case, and probably all of the Innovates and all these other shoes that we have laying around, they tend to have the same lasts. So Metcons tend to run kind of narrow. And Nanos are known for having a wider toe box. And I think maybe Innovate's somewhere in between potentially.
Yeah, it depends on the model, but it's somewhere in between.
They have a couple different lasts depending on the model specifically.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. And it's really interesting because I was actually talking to Steven, the CEO of Zero Shoes, and he was talking about there are over 100 different lasts that shoe companies can choose from when creating the shoe. And generally shoe companies try to find the last that's going to capture the biggest market share. Yeah. And so that's why it's when we talk about the Nano and the Metcon, for example, they're both marketing to folks with slightly wider feet, slightly more narrow feet. And that's why if you don't fit into a Nano, it's not your problem. It's just that you don't align with the mold of the shoe, and you would probably fit in something different. So
case in point is for me, maybe not this colorway, but I used to love the look of Metcons, and I really wanted, I had a couple that oh my gosh, I gotta have those. I could not walk 400 meters without 2 enormous blisters forming on the back of my heels. I thought it was the specific shoe, or maybe I sized it wrong. I got a completely different model, Metcon, same exact thing happened. I actually still have scars on the back of my heels from the month I tried to force myself to wear Metcons because I just wanted to wear them because they were cool and they had this cool slidey thing on the back. And I'm sure, Jake, you have a different feeling about certain shoes where, oh, I don't like the wide toe box. I know for me, like, I've always loved my Nanos. My feet have slid around a little bit in them. But lately, like I said, I've like totally fallen in love with the Innovates simply because like it kind of feels like a happy medium. Like my foot just feels perfect in it. So you need to find, just like a house, you need to find a nice little foot home for your feet.
And what I will add and say before we take this point out is if you have Metcons that have a white heel, don't loan them to Ben because you can be assured that he will bleed on them.
I will bleed on them. I was very bloody. But again, we obviously know lots of people love the Metcon, so you got to try it for yourself. So we've talked about we've talked about the toe box and how you want to spread out your toes a little bit, but maybe for some people you want a little narrower one depending on the size of your feet. Now let's move on to point number 3. Point number 3 is midsole and stack height. What does that mean?
Yeah, so basically the midsole construction of a shoe is this material here that separates the insole from the outsole. And we're going to be talking about stack height, which is the amount of material that separates your foot from the ground. Now, why would this matter for cross training? Well, in the realm of specificity, when it comes to like heavier loading, so if you're maxing out often or you're very strong, you'll generally want a shoe that has slightly less stack height in between the foot and the ground.
Is that why Converses are like really popular powerlifting shoes? Because
Yeah.
they're pretty small distance between your foot and the actual dirt.
Exactly, and even something like a weightlifting shoe that does have a high offset, that's why the heel is so firm.
Right.
Because you don't want something that's going to be really compressible. That's why we don't recommend doing 1RM squats and
Squishy
running
running
shoes.
shoes, yeah.
Exactly. So for my stronger lifters out there who are concerned about compression in shoes and like in shoes overall ability to allow them to root the feet without actually having any form of like ankle mobility or moving because of compression due to weight, generally less stack heights will be a better bet. And you can look at companies and like the materials they're using. So high density foams are usually a pretty common one used in cross training shoes. That offers a nice blend of reactivity but also stability. And then also like if you could look at something like a Metcon 6, which pretty much has like no midsole construction. The versatility you're getting in this shoe is actually from the insole. So this is like usually a really great option for folks who want to train super heavy because they are a very stable option. They're very low to the ground. So when considering stack height and midsole, just consider how you plan to train.
And then like I would imagine like if you're maybe doing more box jumping and running and things where like you're dynamic on your feet, then something with a little bit more stack height, have basically a little bit more foam between your foot and the actual ground is potentially beneficial.
Exactly, that'll give you a bit more reactivity generally.
This isn't something to focus on too much. If you're just doing general cross training, pretty much all the shoes we've gone over are decent. They're good enough, okay? And we'll get into that a little bit later. But now let's move on to point number 4. Point number 4, it's all about the outside of the shoe. So when it comes to the outside of the shoe, we have the outsole, and then we have the upper. Nailed it. So the upper is usually the fabric-y material. Fabric-y is now a word. And then the outsole is the actual rubber that's meeting the road, so to speak. So talk to us a little bit about, I guess, let's go over both of them kind of at the same time. Why does that matter?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the outsole and the upper specifically in the realm of cross training, generally we're going to be most concerned with durability because both of those features will feed better into certain activities. So we were talking about the 245 here, which is so comfortable and lightweight. It has a full, like more mesh, like soft upper.
I love this shoe.
Probably not going to be your best bet for things like rope climbs or even like burpees where you're dragging the toe a lot because we could have a little bit of breakdown up here with the actual material and how this lip from the outsole wrapped up is actually fitting. Now, when we talk about outsole construction, what we're worried about here is the overall durability when training outside or indoors, however you like to train. Because if we're training outdoors, generally we're going to want a full rubber outsole. Now, obviously, if you're wearing a running shoe, there can be exposed midsole layers, but that's fully different for the specificity of that shoe. But when we're talking about cross training specifically, we usually don't want to have any exposed midsole layers. So like in the Metcon 7, one of my gripes is the exposed midsole grooves that it has in the forefoot. And what ends up happening is like if you're doing cross training or any form of athletic focused activity and not doing like dedicated running, you're doing a lot of lateral movements, you're doing stop-start stuff, you're doing shorter runs, and what ends up happening is that foam material can then get scratched up, it can kind of start to fray and like have that like flakiness to it, or you can even pick up rocks, etc., and they can get lodged in. When talking about cross-training shoes, and like if you're a more athletic-focused athlete with your style of like with wearing a cross-training shoe, basically, a full rubber outsole is just a good bet for overall durability when tackling workouts in the gym on like rubber surfaces or commercial gyms, and then going outside and training potentially on turf, tracks, or even concrete.
Yeah, like if you're, another thing to think about is also like, I mean, the tread pattern, while it doesn't matter too much if you're predominantly like, if you're only training on like the rubber mats that we have all over, then something like this where it's, you know, it's flat, I think the See these other ones? It's like there's not too much in the way of tread happening here. It's not like we're driving off-road vehicles with this, right? But then when you look at something like this that has a little bit more of an aggressive tread, that's going to be potentially better on like looser surfaces. So like a turf or a trail or grass or something like that. So if you're doing some outdoor running, maybe some trail running, then pick up something that maybe has a little bit more grippiness, a little bit more, maybe not cleats, but more knobbiness on the outsole. I nailed it. But if you're just going to be inside a gym, then going with something that's a little bit flatter and not as knobby could really work.
Yeah. And like this is a great example too of a shoe that does have exposed midsole. So like running outside in these, you could potentially scratch this up if this mid outsole starts to break down. You could actually get some rocks lodged in there. So this is a great example, to your point, of a shoe that would work really well in like a gym setting, and the outsole wouldn't probably matter for long-term durability. But if you started tackling workouts outside in these, then you may want to be a little bit conscious of training on concrete, especially if you're doing stop-start work where you're on the forefoot a lot.
Interesting. Or playing pickleball all day long like I do. Yeah. All right, awesome. So another thing we obviously have to mention is rope climbs. Rope climbs are probably one of the most treacherous things for a shoe in all of CrossFit or in all of functional fitness. And that's because we're using our feet to clamp down on something that's very abrasive. It can really bang up a shoe. So if you have something, again, that has like more of a fabricy outside, that's okay, but just know that you could bang it up a lot more. But if you have something that has more of a durable, like they've clearly built the outside of the shoe to withstand a lot, and also has like these ridges. I know pretty much all the shoes anymore have these like really high outsoles that kind of come up the side of the shoe to prevent any sort of rub on the fabric. All this being said, it's time to move on to probably our most important point of the video, which seems almost counterintuitive to the video that we just made, and that's point number 5, which is it doesn't matter as much as a lot of people make it sound. We've talked about a lot of stuff. I know Jake geeks out over this stuff, and yes, there are some shoes that in theory are better than others when it comes to doing cross training. However, that being said, if Matt Frazier wore old school Nike or like old school New Balance grandfather shoes, he would still win the CrossFit Games, right? All those years. If Rich Froning, instead of wearing his fancy pantsy Nanos, wore, I don't know, literally Crocs, he probably would still win the CrossFit Game. If Tia Toomey wasn't wearing Nobles and she was wearing maybe not flip-flops, but really any other shoe or running shoe, she probably would have still won the CrossFit Games. So it's not something that will make a major difference in your performance. My buddy John Woolley, who I do a podcast with now, always says, if you have to think about your shoes in the middle of the workout, then it's probably not the right shoe for you. You want to be able to put on a shoe and then forget that it's even there. So that means your foot's not cramping, you're not experiencing any sort of blistering happening, and when you're doing things like heavy squats, you feel stable. You're running, you don't feel like your foot is just slapping the ground and rocks are poking through it. Or when you're doing rope climbs, you don't feel like you're absolutely shredding the shoe to pieces and you feel like you can last a really long time. Have anything else to say about that?
Yeah, and it's at this point I love talking about because it's weird because I pump out so much shoe content. People are always like, well, like what about this feature? What about this feature?
This one is 3 grams heavier than that one.
And that's where I think we run into the problem of paralysis by analysis. Like there are so many options, which is great because it gives us a lot of variability to find the right shoe for our needs. But at the end of the day, when talking about shoes, they only will really, really make a difference once we start going deeper into different realms of specificity. Like if you are only, let's say, doing jump rope in your shoes.
Right. Or only marathon running.
Yeah,
there's better shoes for you.
Exactly, man.
But with cross training, we do so much stuff. Probably the most important thing was point number 4, which is durability. Yeah. Right? And then also that toe box, or the toe box, or really like the inside of the shoe. I know for me, I'm probably never going to buy Metcons ever again because I went 0 for 3 or 0 for 2 on blisters. For me, I found a shoe that really fits me well. Like these, this is the F-Lite G300s. I freaking love them. They're great. They feel stable. I think they look sick. And all those things considered, they're durable. I used to be a big Reebok guy for a really long time. The Nanos were great. What's your favorite shoe?
Right now, it really depends because I always get asked this question. It depends on the activity. It depends on the activity.
Okay.
My all-time favorite cross-training shoe, still to this date, is the Nike Metcon 4.
Okay, the 4.
I fucking love that shoe. Like I have a pair and I will only bring them out for very special
And that's probably what these are going to be for me. I haven't even put them on yet because they're so beautiful. Anyway, so find a shoe that works for you. If you would like to get the proprietary shoe calculator that, again, Jake has on his website, we're also going to put a similar version specifically for functional fitnessers on our website. Go down below, it's in the top comment, or you can click the link in the description, or just go to wadprep.com/shoes or shoe. We'll make sure they all redirect to the right spot. answer a few questions, enter your name and email, and then we will tell you which shoe you might like. So if you have a narrower shoe, we might suggest something different. Or if you're someone who does a ton of running, we're gonna suggest something different. If you deadlift 600 pounds all the time, then we're gonna suggest something different. So if you want to find out what the calculator algorithm spits out as a suggested shoe for you, and we're also going to try to accumulate some discount codes for you that you can utilize. Make sure you click the link below, or again, just go to watprep.com/shoes and take the test to see what we recommend. Of course, before you go, or right as you go, make sure you click the link to his channel, hit subscribe on That Fit Friend. Jake has some amazing content, and if you really want to geek out about shoes, look no farther than the shoe geek himself. What else do you have on your channel?
So I have a ton of fitness content as well. I'm also a coach. I've been coaching now for close to a decade. Gosh, I've been coaching for close to a decade. So I try to blend in the coaching knowledge and background with the shoe content to highlight like, hey, like there are some biomechanical things to think about with your footwear, but at the same time, if you do love shoe reviews and all the latest cross-training shoes, consider subscribing. I love also like folks who leave comments and shit. Like, let's geek out on my videos together. Like the community has been really great. So I really appreciate it.
Speaking of comments, great comment to add is, what is your favorite shoe? Like if you've been doing functional fitness, CrossFit, freaking, I don't care, running, marathoning, leave your favorite shoes that you've ever owned in the comments below. Even if it's a dress shoe, even if it's a high-heeled shoe, I don't care. Leave it in the comments below. Give us some comments. And also, this is a great chance to leave your own bad shoe review. Like, have you tried a shoe? Like for me, I tend to not recommend Metcons just because like those 4s that he loved gave me blisters. And that's just my own personal experience while he's loving them, right? So what didn't work for you, leave it in the comments below as well. And be sure to subscribe to his channel. And we are coming out with more content. So I will see you in the next video. You know what? I really need to make sure I'm investing this year. So not only will I max out my Roth IRA for $6,000, I'm gonna take an additional $6,000 and complete my Noble collection.